Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Apostate. And on today's live stream, we're not going to be taking live callers, but we will be taking one caller. Ava is going to talk to us today about her life as an ex Muslim woman in the US and her journey out of Islam and some of her opinions on how things are going for ex Muslims in the US. I'm not doing her justice with this introduction, but I'll give her a chance to talk herself in a few minutes. But first of all, thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate you being here. If you would like to support this live stream, if you would like to hear more, subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and follow me every Wednesday. There is usually a live stream here on Wednesdays. And next week we actually have a special guest. If everything goes well, I won't be taking callers, but I'll be talking to a beloved YouTuber that has not made an appearance on this channel yet, but I have made an appearance on his. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, without further ado, I will add today's caller, Ava, to the live stream. Hey, Ava, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thank you for doing this live and allowing me to share my story with you. And I have to say that introduction is really good. Um, I really feel very grateful for you and your channel. You do a lot more than you realize, and giving a voice to ex-Muslims. And it's something that I wish I had. Um, 10 years ago when I had left the faith. And so um, it's really heartwarming and very just, it makes me feel hopeful to see a lot of people coming out and taking that risk to speak out.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I'm grateful that I get to be one of the people who's able to participate in this movement and that I'm able to provide such a space, that I'm privileged enough to have this opportunity. So yeah, I'm happy to be here as well. Yeah, thank you for saying that. So, as you mentioned briefly, you had left Islam 10 years ago. Where do you want to start with telling your story?
Wow. I guess maybe I kind of would start with my childhood. Um, so I was born and raised in the United States, and my parents are immigrants. I won't really disclose from where, but yeah, my parents were immigrant parents. And obviously, I Muslim too, but I grew up as a Sunni Muslim. Um, just ever since I was really young, um, more particularly when I started school, um, I always felt very different from the other students in my class. It wasn't apparently clear at the time, but like I didn't really, my parents really didn't discuss like, oh, like Islam to me. Um, and like it's kind of hard to describe it, but like for example, when I would be wearing like I had a at my elementary school, we would be wearing like a school uniform where the girls would be wearing like skirts to school, and I had to wear pants under that. My parents didn't allow me to show my legs. And the other kids at school would ask me like, "Oh, why aren't you why are you wearing pants under your skirt?" And I never really had an answer for that, you know. And I would go home and I'd ask my mom and my dad like, "Why do I have to wear pants under my skirt?" And they would say, "Oh, it's because you're Muslim, right?" Okay, but I wasn't wearing a hijab at that time. And as the years go by, um, I start going to like weekend Islamic schools where I would be, you know, memorizing the Quran and, you know, learning what it means to be a Muslim, right? And it was becoming more abundantly clear to me, like, oh, I'm Muslim, and my neighbors who are not Muslim, that there's a huge difference between us. Um, and it's like, why? I still didn't understand the why part of it. And the more I started to question it, the more restrictive um, things started to become. And my dad took me out of public school when I was about 8 years old, um, about halfway through third grade. Um, I was actually attending a public school at the time, and that particular elementary school, they did not have school uniforms. And so a lot of the kids would wear just regular clothes. And there was this time where my dad was picking me up from school, and he saw the little girls in my class wearing shorts and tank tops. And I mean, it was still appropriate, you know. Um, it was within the bounds of like the school dress code. But I remember my dad um, driving me home that day, and he was just like, he seemed really angry. And then a week after that incident, he sits me down, and then he tells me, "I'm switching you out of school." And I asked him why. He said,
Wait, to
"I'm
clarify,
taking."
what's the incident here?
The incident is that he got angry, um, seeing the other kids at school, the way that they were dressed. And this was like right when the US
How
invaded
old were you?
Iraq. I was 8 years old.
So
And
the incident, I know that you don't mean to use that word in any particular way, but the way that we use words is very telling. To him, this was some incident, but to the rest of the world, the incident was your dad saw a bunch of 8-year-old girls dressed in a way that he thought was too sexualized compared to how you're supposed to dress.
yes, yes. And he was really point blank about it too. He told me like he didn't want me to being influenced by the other students. Um, Meaning he didn't want me, you know, getting any ideas that it was okay to dress that way, you know. And at that age, like you don't, it's hard to understand, right? But the message I got from that was, oh, it's not okay for my body to be shown in that way. Like there's something wrong with me, you know. That I guess I kind of internalized it in that way, but it was all under the guise of Islam, right? Um, he told me, he said, I don't want you getting influenced by these girls. And so he took me out of that public school. And then I started attending this Islamic school from age 8 to age 10. But I would attend other Islamic schools from then on until like the end of like my high school. Um, so at that school was the first time I really, how do I say, I got to interact with a lot more Muslim kids. And at that school, there was a dress code there as well. Um, all the girls had to wear hijab in class. Um, Girls from first grade until the sixth grade, they're all wearing hijabs in class. But for some strange reason, the kindergarteners weren't wearing hijab. Like I don't know why there's such a huge difference between a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old. But hey, that's I guess that's where the line was drawn at that particular school. And yeah, so I, I really got involved at that school. Um, at that school, like we would have our regular like school curriculum, but on top of that, we would have like Islamic studies. And yeah, and that's kind of where I would say my I don't want to use that word indoctrination, but that's coming out of Islam. That's really how it felt to me. Like I was being indoctrinated into the faith, and that's when my parents really started to control my environment. Um, from then on, I really didn't have any friends who were non-Muslim anymore. All my friends were Muslim. My neighbors, they would intentionally have us moving into neighborhoods where there was a majority of Muslim people. Right, so my neighbors were Muslim. Whenever we'd go shopping for clothes, we would go to stores, shopping centers where they were owned by Muslims, right? Um, my whole environment completely changed. And it's almost as if like my parents were trying to create this atmosphere, right? As close as they can get to what it feels like to be living in a Muslim country, but in America. Um, of course, like I still was very exposed to the American culture, um, but that wasn't something that was welcoming, if you will. I mean, this was post 9/11, and 15 years ago, um, it was very normal to just have Muslim people being, called out by, you know, redneck Republicans, shouting at them, "Go back to your home country," you know. And just experiencing that, I feel really fueled a lot of us versus them mentality. Um, I I can see that reflected a lot um, within the community, right? And there's a lot of things that were going on that the U.S. government was doing at the time, that really victimized Muslim people, and rightfully so. I'm not going to be defending that, but at the same time, um, it also, in a way, like isolating Muslims in that way, really fueled a lot of what's called radicalization amongst Muslim Americans and Muslims in the West, right? Um, so yeah, so I was attending Islamic school, and I started to really um, feel like I was a part of a community because there was no other community outside of that for me, and I really held on to that us versus them mentality. Like I was getting that from my parents, telling me, like you can't like stay out. Like I had a childhood like neighbor friend who was non-Muslim, and I couldn't stay over at her house because I couldn't. They didn't want me to be influenced by her Christian parents. They don't. It was just things like that, and so they really made a huge effort in um, drilling that in my mind. Um, and so, yeah, but then there was always this part of me that felt very uneasy. Like whenever I would go to um, Friday prayer, and I'd be listening to the Sheikh's sermons, I would just be struck with fear. Um, just like every Friday prayer, it's all doom and gloom. It's like you're gonna go to hell if you don't do this and this and this. If you're not this perfect character caricature like of what it means to be a Muslim person. It was really horrible, and I really um, was very conflicted in fearing Allah, right? But at the same time, we're being told Allah is this ever loving, uh, merciful God, right? We always, with every prayer, we're saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? Um,
In God's name, the merciful, the most merciful, basically. That's how we
yes,
start each prayer. Yeah.
yeah. And then after that prayer, it's like, and then it's outlined like with all this horrible, like really terrifying text that we're supposed to read out during prayer. But I mean, yeah, it's like, oh, God is merciful, but at the same time, he like punishes people for this the most like benign thing, right? And I I didn't really know how to reconcile with it, but at that age, I didn't know I could. Like it was deeply rooted in me, but I wasn't allowing myself to even have those thoughts or questions in my mind. Not until much later as I got older. But yeah, and so as I go through my schooling, I start middle school and I make friends with this really sweet Muslim girl. Um, and when I started middle school, I went to a different Islamic school. And so she was my first friend. She was the one that welcomed me to the school and really like took me under her wing. And she was just the sweetest person you could ever know. And then after, like in the middle of sixth grade, her parents decide to just take all of their 5 children and go to the UAE. And they left for a couple months. And my friend comes back at the beginning of seventh grade, and she just had a 180-degree turn. Suddenly, she's spewing out hatred against infidels, you know, and
How old were you at
she
this point? How old was she?
12. We were 12 years old.
So she
And
went to the UAE for a couple of months with her family. They took
yeah,
everybody there, and she came back spewing hate about infidels as a 12 year
infidels,
old.
yeah. As
And
a
it's
12 year
not even
old.
like she went to a stereotypically Islamically restrictive country. I mean, we hear that, Dubai's in the UAE. There's a lot of international meetings there. People from all sorts of places go there. But she managed to get all of this hate indoctrinated into her in the UAE just a couple of months.
Yes, just for a couple months. Yes. And and she traveled around the Middle East too. Like she went to Egypt for a little bit, and yeah, she wasn't just solely in the UAE, but she went to the Middle East, and she stayed most of her time in UAE, and she came back, and it was like I couldn't recognize her, and like we would just have like normal conversations, right? And then suddenly topics about um just randomly the topic of like non-Muslims will come up in conversation, and then she would be like, "Oh, they deserve to go to hell. They deserve to burn in hellfire." And they're all gonna get what's coming for them on the day of judgment, and just really bizarre things. But then at the same time, I I was also hearing that rhetoric um at our local mosque as well. And
In the
so
US, you're saying.
in the
Like
US,
you're
yeah,
hearing that at the mosque in the US.
yes. And so it became like this normalized thing where suddenly it was just like it became like a matter of fact to say um like kafirs, they deserve to burn in hell, you know and I really um I I didn't realize I was starting to think in that way. Um but I did. I started to take on that mentality too. But I had other friends as well. Like I don't know why. I think once we hit middle school, for some strange reason, um, I don't know why a lot of the mosques, our school was just so openly, just so open with Islam to us. Like I feel like we were like there was no like whitewashing. Um, for us,
Open
it
about
was
what? Like open about what?
open about what Islam really entails. This whole like xenophobia, um, and like really just very hard line with the faith. Like for example, um, there was no kid in any time in our school who did not pray 5 times a day. You know, um, other than like of course girls, when they're menstruating. Other than that, like everyone prayed 5 times a day. Um, and the really good, quote unquote, good Muslim students would pray Sunnah along with it, right? And it became like this really strange competitiveness, if you will, to prove to other people just how much of like a pious Muslim you are. Um, I remember in eighth grade, a lot of my friends started wearing niqabs. Um, and they're
So
13
they
years
were
old.
13 years old wearing a full niqab. And for contrast, the incident that you described earlier was your father was angry when he was picking you up from school, seeing women, sorry, I said women, seeing 8-year-old girls dressed normally, like everyone else around them, like not in a way that breaks the school's rules, not in a way that is too uncovered, but to him it is too uncovered. So the
Yeah.
standard, I guess the standard for perfection was a niqabi.
Yes. Oh yeah. And I remember this one particular friend. Um, she she was also a hijabi, but the way she wore her hijab, she wore it in a bun where her neck was shown. And I remember a lot of people kind of commenting that on her, like, oh, you will look so much beautiful if you covered your neck, or she'd be told you're not wearing your hijab correctly. Um,
I
and
never quite understood that line of reasoning when Muslims tell women you would look more beautiful if you wear the hijab properly or if you wear the hijab at all. But isn't the point of wearing the hijab is to not look beautiful and appealing?
yes, yes, it's an oxymoron, isn't it?
It's pure
Yeah,
gaslighting. It's saying
yeah,
make yourself uglier because that makes you prettier.
exactly, exactly. But that's why I don't understand Muslims today. Um, because there's this whole push for like making Muslim women, like Islam, be like this feminist uh religion, and it's not. And like the way in which, like, 10 years ago, um a a lot of the rhetoric, I think I got a bit of like a precursor when yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hmm.
I don't know how much you heard.
No, I
Um,
heard everything. Yeah, go ahead. You got a
oh,
precursor, is what you said?
yeah, to like this really strange like push for like feminist Muslim women. Um, in my teen years, a lot of the adults in the community, you know, they would push this idea like, oh, you guys need to be strong, because you guys are the future of Islam. And the reason why you're the future of Islam is because you're going to be potentially mothers in the future, right? It was never like, oh, like an option whether or not we would ever wanted to get married and have children and settle down, right? It's just like you're going to be mothers, and then it's your responsibility to then pass the deen down to your children. And so I've seen a lot of girls around me up, um, taking that mantle, if you will, um, to really be like this really strong Muslimah. But then those girls end up, going to liberal colleges, right? And majority of Muslims are Republicans, right? And so they're actively. So what I'm trying to say is like, how do I explain this? A lot of that rhetoric somehow got lost in the narrative, right? Now it feels like a lot of those Muslim women are strong because they're women who happen to be Muslim, right? It's the religion itself is not at the forefront anymore. It's like a second thought, if you will. Almost like saying things like, "Oh, I'm strong as a black woman," right? As if like Islam is not, being Muslim is not something that you can change about you. Um, I don't know if I'm making any sense. Like I feel like I'm kind of rambling on about this, but
So
um,
you're saying it's an identity that is forced upon them, or it's almost like a life sentence, kind of, um, in the same way that being black is something that you can't change about yourself. Being a Muslim woman is something that you can't change. So the strong ones are strong in spite of being Muslim, not because they're Muslim women.
yes, exactly, exactly. Um, yeah, and that wasn't the case for me, over a decade ago. um, the narrative was, you need to be strong. You guys are strong Muslim women because you're supposed to pass the religion down to your children. And it always somehow revolves around being a mother, being a wife. Um, but then at the same time, we're expected to have an education, right? Um, and and cook and clean while we're working a full time job. It's crazy. Um, but yeah, I guess what I'm so a lot of my friends in middle school started wearing the niqab, and a lot of those girls um were praised a lot, you know, and I never wore a niqab. Um, I don't know why. I definitely kind of felt that pressure myself to maybe I should wear niqab because a lot of my friends would be like, "Oh, you should try it out." And they would try to convince me and say, like it's so good for you. It's like, "Oh, it's not as like hard as you think it is." But I didn't see it that way, at least not consciously. Um, but yeah, and
So at what age did you start wearing the
up
hijab?
from that, oh, I started wearing the hijab full time when I was 9 years old. My friends and I, it sounds like a cute story, but it really isn't because it just shows just how indoctrinated we were. Um, my friends and I, we decided together to wear the hijab together. Like we scheduled a day that we were going to wear the hijab, and then we were going to encourage each other to stick to wearing the hijab. And I did it out of friendship, but also did it because it was expected of me at some point in my life. And so at that time, it felt like I thought I was taking control of myself, like I was maturing as a 9-year-old and being like, like I'm beginning to take um responsibilities for myself, right? Um I decided to wear the hijab, and I didn't have my parents force it on me. Um but yeah, that's the reason why I started to wear the hijab at 9, and it's partly why like I suffered from vitamin D deficiency. And funnily enough, all the girls in my class were vitamin D deficient. And yeah, by the time we hit menopause, like we're all gonna suffer from osteoporosis. Hopefully not, but yeah, that's definitely a huge health issue. I'm definitely looking forward to if I ever live to be that age. But yeah,
I mean, I hope that by then, I mean, if you're still wearing the hijab, please do take vitamin D supplements. I mean, I think everyone should take them just in case. Um, and that's sad. I know you're saying it's a funny story because I mean of the irony of it all, but it's really sad that there's many women who will live and die in suffering just because they believe or the people around them believe that this is what God wanted. And it makes no sense to me that God would create women with hair to begin with and then tell them to cover it up and then have them be biologically tuned that they need the sun, but they don't get it. It doesn't make any
exactly.
sense to me.
Yes. Yeah, very bizarre. And another point on that too, um, whenever I started menstruating, um, I didn't understand why I couldn't pray during those times, um, or why I couldn't touch the Kitab or the Quran. Um, it really made me feel really sad during those times because I felt my salvation was at risk, because I wasn't praying. Um, and I thought, if I'm not praying, would God judge me even more harshly? But then at the same time, Allah, he made it so that I don't pray during those times, and so s- I was starting to have those contradictions playing around in my mind. Um, and then the
I mean,
whole
that's
notion of like,
that's so scary. How old were you when that was happening? When you were worried that you weren't praying on your period?
oh, right as I got it, 12, when I was 12.
So
Um,
I'm sorry to pause you every now and then, but I want to contextualize it for people who haven't lived your life. So, let's recap. As an 8-year old, you were taken out of your environment and put in a purely Muslim environment because your family was worried that you would not turn out to be as Muslim as they want you to be. And then you started wearing the hijab at the age of 9, a year after you were immersed in this Muslim environment. And then when you got your period, you're told that you cannot, and this is not just some kind of extremist opinion, it is very common and very well known that a Muslim woman, if she's having her period, that is considered, like, she's considered to be in a state of impurity or filth, najasa. It's like touching a
yes,
dog or, like, having used the bathroom. It's the same state of, you're not supposed to touch the Quran, you're not supposed to, you're just impure as a person in that state. And you were worried at the time, the days that I'm missing not being a good Muslim, because I can't be, because I'm legislated by Islam to not be a Muslim, I mean, not participate in the rituals during those days. I am risking going to hell because those are days that don't count as good days for me. And you were
yes,
12.
and I was 12. Yeah.
That's
Um,
just to recontextualize all of that, for people. And you're not, I mean, you're very smart to have those thoughts, but it's very stressful to have those thoughts. But you're not wrong. Like, this is not some kind of far-fetched connection that you made in your mind. There's a hadith, and if someone wants to quote it in the comments, please do. Muhammad explaining why women are naqisatu aqlin wa din, deficient in mind and in religion. And the part, his explanation for why women are deficient in mind is because you need 2 women to bear witness instead of 1 man, which is a reason he came up with that rule, but he's using it as reason why women are deficient. And also deficient in religion, in deen, in faith, in religion, whatever you want to translate it to, because women cannot practice when they're on their period. Again, a rule that he made. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you would restrict women from doing certain things and then count it against them, then women are losing by default.
yes, exactly. Um, and you explained it so well, and like, that's exactly it. Um, and I still didn't allow myself to question it, you know. Um, like I was having like, oh, like a lot of fear, but then I was also afraid to question, because to question means you are, starting to leave, like, you're questioning Allah, and that, in a sense, kind of makes you like, that you've left the faith, essentially, right? That you need to re-say your shahada again. Um,
So if you
I
entertain questioning thoughts, you have already committed the sin or thought crime of leaving Islam.
Yeah, yeah, and I was really that scared me more than anything. Um, but yeah, I that still I was just seeing a lot of those contradictions just playing out, and I was always told, you guys, Muslim women, are so fortunate because they are protected by their veil, right? Um, this whole myth of like Muslim women are less likely to be sexually assaulted. You know, that narrative just kept playing over and over and over again. But I was not seeing that as a reality. Um, I remember I would go to like my weekend Islamic school, a different one. Funny enough, I would go to Islamic school during the weekdays, and then I'd go again to a different school on the weekend. So literally like 24/7, 7 days of the week, like I was just immersed in Islamic studies. And there is this one teacher who is an imam who would have us like memorize the Quran, and he was just very creepy, and he took a liking to a lot of the girls in class, and I don't want to trigger anyone, but there was this incident where I he somehow he singled me out the most than the other girls in class. And there was this one day where he intentionally had me be the last person to recite the Quran to him. And he made sure that all the other students had left the class. And then he made me like sit down on the table, like on a chair. You know those like school tables, those school desks, really. And I was sitting on one end, he was sitting on the other end, and I'm literally reciting the like text, like the verses to him, right? And then he is trying to feel up on me, and I was so shocked. I didn't know what to say. Like I kind of just like jerked back, but then at the same time, there was this fear in me, like um, I feel like I had to just keep saying it, just keep reading the verses to him. Um, Maybe at that moment, maybe I thought just saying it would protect me in some way against him. Um, but it didn't. And then I remember just really in shock, and I ended up leaving and going with the other kids to um to go play outside. And then I had told the other girls what happened, and one by one, literally, they all had a story of their own. And I was just in tears. And I said, you know what? I think we really need to tell our parents about this. And so um, we had told our moms. And when we went back home, and I remember like my dad just not believing it, and he just said, like maybe you misunderstood what he was doing, like, and then he was trying to reason what happened, um, and there was just no way of convincing him that an imam, and he knew him personally too, that he would do that to me. And but somehow he still felt obligated to talk with like the head sheikh at that place. And the next day, uh, all the other girls and their moms and their parents came, and there was this one girl who comes back and she says, "I lied about everything that happened." And we're like, "What do you mean you lied?" She's like, "Yeah, I lied. He didn't do anything to me." Um, and then her mom was pushing her, when we were talking to the imam, the guy who's in charge of the whole school, and she's like pushing her, like, say you lied, like, you tell him that you lied about it. And she's like, yeah, yeah, and like you can tell she it was obvious she didn't lie about it. How what 12-year-old is gonna lie about a grown man groping her? Like, she's 12 years old. Okay, like there's
And
no.
and she's a sheltered 12 years old too, like a
Yes,
Muslim 12-year-old girl. Um, First of all, I'm so sorry that that has happened to you. I'm really frustrated in how, I mean, this happens all the time, but it happened to you in a country that is supposed to protect you from that kind of thing. Like it happened to you in the US. It still happens
yes,
in countries like America.
yeah, yeah,
And your father, I have to comment on this. Your father, the man who got outraged when he saw a bunch of 8-year-olds dressed like 8-year-olds are, doesn't believe that this man could be aroused by a 12, 13 year old or whatever the girls' ages were and your ages were. Like he couldn't put two and two together. Like he thinks 8-year-olds are a sexual object, but not his own daughter being telling him a story about being attacked by a man that he trusts. He sided with a man.
yeah. Essentially, yeah, yeah. And that I think it always stayed in the back of my mind. Like, I definitely didn't see my father in the same light after that. Um, because like I like I knew from then on, like, I could never be open about anything that happened to me, because I know exactly what's gonna happen because it happened. I know exactly how they're gonna treat it, and I yeah, and so like I just having from that first experience, just
Wait,
that
to
really.
clarify, sorry, I'm sorry, I interrupted you while you were talking about this. So that one girl came forward and said she lied because her
Yeah,
parents were nudging her to do so, or at least her mom. What about every other story?
yeah. Every other story, the girls, they their parents, were supportive, um, and they told that sheikh, like, okay, this is what happened, and what the sheikh did was he said, I'm going to talk to him, but then he was still allowed to teach us, you know. And I remember coming back first day of class, like going back to his class afterwards, and he was just so like passive aggressive towards us. um and but also at the same time, like, he really pushed the line. Like, he would say things like, oh, um like, I don't know why. I think he had it out against me in particular, because he would ask me, like, oh, um do you know how to cook? And I'm like, I don't know how to cook. And then he's like, oh yeah, you're gonna learn how to cook when you get older, you know. Don't you're
The,
gonna
the
be
words I would have for that man, like, who the fuck cares if you think she knows how to cook or not? Like, why was he even allowed to interact with any of you past that point?
yeah, that's my question. That's my
I, I'm,
question.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
but every parent there failed. Every single adult in this interaction, every single one of them, not just the rapist sheikh, every single person present there, every single adult has failed, has utterly failed.
they really did. Um, um, yeah, and that
And like the
really
cops were never called, like nothing
no,
happened
no,
to the
no,
guy.
nope, no, nothing happened. You know, and the stories from the girls, like it doesn't excuse it at all. But he it wasn't like he actually like did uh like he was more handsy, if you will. But
But I mean,
and so
that's
maybe
shifting the goalpost to like what counts as him doing something. Just being handsy doesn't count anymore because they decided it doesn't count.
yeah, yeah, um, yeah, and I agree with you on that. And I really it angers me to this day that that actually happened. Um,
Is he still teaching?
from what I remember, like I think he ended up moving to a different state, and so
I wonder why. Like maybe it's because eventually some sort of consequences caught up to him, but not enough. It sounds like.
no, no, not at all. And after that incident, like I feel like he, in a way, felt even more um, emboldened,
He's
because
untouchable. He really is.
yeah, yeah. And I remember going back to my school, and that friend that I told you about who went to the UAE, she, I never told her his name, right? But I explained to her what happened. And she's like, you know what? I think I know exactly who you're talking about. And she had a story of her own. And so, but she didn't attend that specific school. So this guy, he was notorious um, for stuff like that, and nothing was done. Nothing was done about it. Um, yeah, it was just absolutely insane. Um, but that was also was very common too. I mean, it had to have been common because why else would that happen? Why would the parents allow that to happen? They just brush it under the rug, and just called it a day and said, hey, you know what, like, you know, uh, obviously there was harm done, but in their eyes, like, no harm was done, right? But
Because
yeah,
the act wasn't done yet.
yeah, yeah,
And if
and
it
I can
had,
only
like, I
imagine,
wonder if they would have pushed for a marriage or something.
possibly, possibly. Um, but then he wasn't the only creepy imam. I have a lot of creepy imam stories. Um, uh, gosh, there's another imam that worked at my other like day school, and he had multiple wives. And I had another friend who he was obsessed over her. Let's just say,
A
let's leave it
child,
at that. A child. She was 13,
which, as
and
I mean, I'm sorry, I have to mention this. People say, what Muhammad did marrying a child many, many years ago. That was in the past. That was a different time. All that stuff, which I disagree with. It's not just that he did it that one time. These men see nothing wrong with the concept of lusting for a child. Because once you're like, especially if you're wearing the hijab, what you're saying is, I am a woman. I am and all of what being a woman entails. I am eligible for marriage. I'm eligible for lust. I'm eligible for all these things. It's frustrating that people don't make the connection. If you treat children like grown women, you don't afford them the protection that they deserve. Like when these incidents happen, I'm still in shock that all the parents there, not one of them stood up to the task and called the cops. Like they continue to let him teach at the same school. I'm shocked. I did not see that coming.
No, yeah. And this is happening in America, mind you. Um,
Yeah, like that's, can you imagine how often, like, this is not just a conspiracy that it happens in other countries sometimes. This happens in America, and it happens regularly in countries where Muslims are the majority. It happens in horrifying numbers. Like every Muslim woman or ex-Muslim woman has a story to share about being assaulted, and especially by a sheikh. And it's just very ironic coming from the premise that Islam protects women and it covers up women to avoid lust, and when someone does commit something horrible as harassing a woman, they will be lashed, they will be executed because Islam doesn't tolerate this stuff. But that's not true.
yeah, yes, I agree with you. Um, and it's just so bizarre. But I feel like um with the my friend essentially being groomed by this imam at our school, we we were very cautious of him, you know? Like we actually banded together to protect that friend. Um I remember clearly like there was one day where he wanted her. We were out at recess and then he wanted her to go talk to him by herself, right? And we were outside in an open field and he's like, "Yeah, why don't we just take a walk? I want to ask you some questions." And then we're like, no, she has something to do with us. We're working on a project together, like she doesn't have the time right now to go with you." And like we really like we try to pull up a shield against him to protect her. But yeah, it's so funny because, like you said again, Islam, you know, we're told we are protected. But here we are, a bunch of 13-year-old girls banding together to protect another 13-year-old against a grown man who is masquerading, as this pious and uh, holier than thou um, individual. It's sick. It's just sick. Um, but yeah, I have a lot more stories like that. But those experiences, they were cracks in a dam for me. Um, it was just one incident after another, and I I was having a lot of problems reconciling it because I was just clearly being shown um, not all Muslims like like I was being shown what it means to be a woman in Islam. There's obviously huge double standards. Um, and but at the same time, like I still was very afraid of Allah. I didn't want to put up that question in my mind, like, um, is it worth it? Like is it worth it praying to this deity who doesn't even respect you, but expects you to show up 5 times a day and spend literally every second of their life worshiping them. You know, I, it was just hard for me to come to terms with, and but somehow I would brush those experiences away. Um, and there was other times too where so I remember when I was 16 years old, um, was when I really let myself ask that question. Um, am I a real Muslim? In the sense, like, do I believe in this faith anymore? Um, and I really struggled really hard for a long time with that. And but somehow, like, I was kind of in a way forced to look at that because, for example, I still was under the notion that Islam was still good for women. Um, but then on the other hand, I was like, I remember distinctly going on Facebook, um, and I was looking for some middle school friends of mine who I haven't talked to in quite some time. And I came across her Facebook page, and I saw that she was married at 16 with a 1-year-old child, um, and married to a 25-year-old. And I I was floored, because I felt so incredibly sorry for her. And she the her that could have easily have been me, you know? I could have been in her place, but the only reason why I wasn't was because my dad wanted me to prioritize my education. And so I felt very um just so angry, you know. And then to top that off, I remember I was raised by my stepmother. She uh she raised me, she married my dad when I was about 4. My parents divorced when I was really young, and my mom didn't really get custody of me and my other sibling. And so she was essentially my second mom, right? She raised me since I was really young. But she never had kids of her own. She was never able to conceive. And so in when I was 16, my dad decides to marry another woman. Um, he didn't get her permission, and he told her after the fact. And what makes this even worse was that my stepmother had just lost her father and her brother. And so the person who is supposed to comfort her in such a trying time ends up cheating on her, right? And saying things like, like making excuses for what he did because it was halal, right? It was a halal marriage. Yeah, it was halal, and it was like forcing her to, in a lot of ways, um, accept it, you know. And I feel I just like my just every experience I've had prior to that, and then that happening, I'm just like, wow.
How was he able to do that in the U.S.?
Oh, he married my other stepmother. Um, she lives overseas. So yeah, he married her overseas. Um, and he would go and visit them during the summertime or during yeah, he would go and visit her every year. And yeah, and I have half siblings who I don't see. I talk to them on the phone. Um, but yeah, that that's my family situation. My stepmother, she did end up leaving, but because she is an immigrant, right? And my dad never really encouraged her to go out and like take like ESL classes to learn English better, or go find a job outside the house. Her job really essentially was to be a caretaker for me and my other sibling. And so when she left him, she felt very uh, scared because now, she's at an age where she's older. And we all know how Muslim guys like young girls. I'm not trying to be mean, but that the whole like ageism
I mean, how
issue.
old was your like second step? I don't know if you consider a stepmom, but how old was that last wife?
She um oh my God, she's literally um 6 years older than me.
So she was 22 when he married her.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but that's another child. Like that's
yeah. And he was
yeah.
in his 50s.
Again, nothing Muhammad didn't do or preach.
No. And funnily enough, um he got a lot of backlash for it from other family members. Because like my stepmother who raised me, she she people felt very sorry for her. They're like, why would you do that? Like, she's always been loyal to you. And he did get criticized, but eventually um that was short lived. And my stepmother, eventually she ended up coming back um to him. um so yeah.
So
Yeah.
he has a wife, your stepmom. He obviously doesn't encourage her to become American in any meaningful way. She was
No.
just, whatever her nationality is, she's just living in a bubble of, Muslim people in her area doing things, like being a homemaker, not learning any skills, not socializing with the out.
She has no power. Really, like she really did not have any way of financially supporting herself. Um, and like yeah, I felt really, I felt very incredibly sorry to her. And my view of my dad, just like, I mean, it was bad before, but it was still like I saw him as like, he's my dad, right? But now it was like I saw him as like another man. Um, and even though men, it's not all men, right? But it was just an abusive man who was taking advantage of his abused wife, and yeah, it was just a really sad state of affairs. And it was just one thing after another. And then I would go back to school and I'm being preached about, you know, like, you need to, like, you guys are our future, you know? And, I started thinking about my own future and I'm like, is this a future I want for myself? Um, do I want to be in situations like this? And I really had to just grapple with that reality. Um, Everything kind of just started to fall apart. Um, and oh yeah, and there's also so besides that one friend who got married at 16, I had another friend who was her dad had brought over this guy. He was 18 and we were 16. I tell you what, my 16th year was it was crazy. But he brought in this guy to live with them because he wanted his daughter to eventually marry him, right? And I remember her like coming back to school and telling me like, oh, uh, telling me about him essentially. And in the back of mine, I'm thinking like, why can't you just say no? Why why isn't that an option on the table? Why do you need to be married at 16? But I still felt scared to say that to her because I just know the culture, the environment that we were in. Just saying those things was not gonna be met with kindness, you know. Um, and funnily enough, they end up, going on. I forgot the term, but essentially dates, right? But there was always like some mahram around her, and it ended up uh, being her sister, which that's not really Islamically correct, right? It has to be either your father, your brother, your uncle. But it ended up being her older sister at their house. But their father would be there. Their father would be there, but then in the same room, it would be just the three of them. And the guy ended up choosing the sister over my friend.
I did not see that coming. What the So,
Yeah,
oh my god. How old was this? I mean, it doesn't even matter at this point, but how old was the sister?
she was 17. She was a year older. And and I remember her like coming back and telling me this, and I'm laughing now, but like I felt like it was such a huge slap in the face for her, you know? Not only was she essentially like she was preparing herself to be in a loveless marriage. Let's just be honest here, you know? Like she was trying to convince herself that this guy was great, you know, and then he ends up being a jackass. Oh, sorry. Could I say that word on YouTube? Um
Yeah, it's fine.
oh, okay. Yeah, he ends up switching on her and choosing the older sister. Um which in the scheme of things, it's such a teenagery thing to do also. I mean, come on, like they were 16, 17, 18 years old. Um, but still pretending expected to play adults. Because we were essentially under Islam, by the time we're 15, we're adults in the eyes of God, right?
Mhm.
All our sins are counted and everything. And so, yeah, yeah, so it was just one thing after the other, and I couldn't really um pretend anymore. Like I really needed to face my reality. Um but then I still was very afraid of Allah. I was still very afraid of going to Jahannam, and just it was psychological torture for me. Like I don't know how else to explain it, but deciding to not pray anymore, I that was really hard because I had to battle with, you know, if I don't pray, I'm going to hell. But then what does like is hell even real? Um, that just being conflicted with those two ideas, and it was really difficult, and I went into a really depressive phase for quite some time, and it didn't really like I would slowly kind of stop like doing things, like I would pretend to like make wudu when if I were going to a group prayer, or and I wouldn't really recite the verses in prayer. Like I would just do the motion, you know, just to save face. And then I would start like not praying anymore, just saying things like, "Oh, I'm on my period," which that was a really common excuse for me. um, and I'd be like, "Oh, I'm on my period. I can't pray," or like, "Oh, I need to go and like wash up," and and then I would take a really long time in the bathroom, which thinking back on it, that just being in the bathroom for too long, that kind of puts up other types of suspicions, like, oh, like, all right, this like, the bathroom is najasa, right? And that's where a lot of jinn and the shaitan likes to roam around, right? And it's like if you're
Wait,
spending
hold
too
up.
much time in
That
the bathroom.
that did not go in the direction I thought it was going to go. So the suspicion is that Jin might be influencing you in the bathroom,
Yeah, yeah. That was a very
and
common.
yeah, that's I want to clarify for the audience. This is not one person talking about their extremist parents believing in jinn, in invisible, aside from the devil, but other creatures like the devil. Most Muslims believe in this kind of stuff, and I myself also used to believe that the bathroom is where they hang out and like dirty, damp places and all that kind of stuff. So you're saying that your parents could have thought that when you spend a lot of time in the bathroom, you're more susceptible to being possessed.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And
I
I've
want
heard
to
that all the
highlight it
time.
just, but people don't seem to understand that this is normal in the Muslim world and even in America among Muslims. Like, this is not an extreme view. This is what we, struggled with growing up. For on one hand, you're not supposed to believe that Harry Potter is real. On the other hand, your parents believe that you might get possessed if you spend too much time in the bathroom.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I wonder how common this is because I would have nightmares about bathrooms because I heard that so often, and it became like this really weird phobia of bathrooms. Um, like I remember like I would feel like I'd be in the bathroom. It was always a public bathroom too, for some strange reason, and I would be in the bathroom, the restroom, the public restroom, and I would always feel like there was some presence around me, and that was my nightmares that I would have as a kid, just being afraid of a bathroom. Um, yeah, I don't know. It really, um, yeah, that was kind of just how ingrained it was in me. But yeah, and the whole talks about jinn. I mean, that was really very common. That was a very common topic. Um, like I would hear so many different stories about like jinn stories. Every For some strange reason, like you would always meet that one person with the jinn story. Um, like
I mean,
either they had
it kind of I've heard some stories here taking these calls from Christians who say that either them or someone in their family had visions about seeing Christ or something, or an angel or something of the sort. And I wouldn't dismiss them while they're talking, but in my head I'm thinking, I heard this 1,000 times about our angels or jinn or whatever it was. um, so yeah, it wasn't uncommon to know someone who said that they had a jinn story, and you believed it because how could so many people be liars? Is what I thought,
yeah,
at least.
yeah, me too. And yeah, I was also like a really very sensitive kid too, and I I, I really believed in them. Um, and it went even a little further than that actually, because there would be stories like I had a friend who her mom supposedly had a jinn in her, and she would be exorcised. Um, and that was a common thing. Like I've heard so many people um, knowing either it happening to them or they know someone who had a jinn in them and then they had to get exorcised. Um,
I've witnessed it in my own family.
really?
Yeah. And obviously the person had no jinn. Eventually they got medical help, or they're also getting medical help at the same time. But there was this idea that you got to cover all your bases. It's this cognitive dissonance. I still to this day don't understand how someone could be a highly educated doctor and also a Muslim. On one hand, if you are truly intimately familiar with the religion, you read these hadiths about eat 7 dates and no poison will harm you, and like, I don't know what seeds are great for you, and it's all BS. But at the same time, you're medically, you know, uh, licensed to, or qualified to actually operate on humans. How do you hold these two ideas at the same time? I don't know, but the people in my family were addressing this person's issues through medicine, and also at the same time, let's cover the metaphysical matters just in case it's a jinn. But they didn't realize that that was harming that. Like, if you start to
Yeah.
convince someone going through some mental health issue that they're possessed by jinn and they're a believer and they might believe you, it starts harming their actual progress, in pursuing real solutions.
Yes. And I actually have a friend who is a psychiatrist. Um, and they know I'm ex-Muslim, and they were trying to ask me questions, and they have a client who has some severe mental health issues, but it was a struggle for them as a provider to try to convince their parents that what their child was experiencing is a psychiatric issue and not a religious issue, because his client, like, and they told me that they had done a lot of exorcisms on his client, and it just obviously it wasn't working, and so it got so bad, his mental health got so bad that his parents had no other choice but to seek out medical help. um it was as if, like you said, like, they needed to really cover all their bases, and yeah, and that was just, it was just so extremely sad that he had to go through that, and I and that's very common. That is very, very common. um I even had my own exorcism. um so when I was 19, I just altogether, like, I stopped. um I just did all only thing that I did was just wear a hijab. But it was very obvious and clear to my family that I, I was leaving the faith. And my dad decided to call this sheikh who specialized in exorcisms. And this was, mind you, this was literally a day before my birthday. And we didn't celebrate birthdays in my family, but I I always felt that was like uh, a really twisted birthday gift from my dad. It's like, oh, like, you somehow uh, are gifting me with an exorcism, making me feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with me because I don't want to follow Islam anymore. But he brought over this sheikh over to our house, and obviously I don't have jinns in me. I don't believe in it, but it really, the experience of it wasn't really as dramatic. Like, all he did was, like, he was sitting on a chair, and then he had me sitting down on the floor, having my back facing him, and he would be reciting. They weren't Islamic verses. It was something different. Um, I wish that I could remember some of the things he said, but it was something very bizarre.
Was it
Um,
like
and it really
dua,
made me,
like prayers, chants, that kind of thing?
yeah, yeah, but it wasn't any that I remember hearing. Um, but
Was
it
it in
just really,
Arabic?
it was in Arabic, yeah.
Mm.
And he started reciting that, and then he had a glass of water next to him, and then he will take a break from reciting, and then he would take a sip and then spray it on me. Um, like, literally, he this guy was spitting on my back. Um, and I remember turning around and I said, "Could you not do that?" And just thinking back on it, like, that was a huge risk, because just resisting, could be seen as a sign that, oh, this might be working, and therefore it's the
Yeah, like
jinn that's
it's
talking.
playing into them, into their narrative. If you say, "Ew, this is I don't want you to do this," and if you act up, then they think that's the jinn that's resisting. But it's just so funny to me that you turned around and you said, "Could you not? Like, are you serious?"
Yeah, I did, and I just thinking back on it, like that was a huge risk, and fun and interesting enough, that guy, he was notorious for like beating people too.
People, as
Um,
in victims, that he's supposed
Victims,
to be
yeah,
helping.
yeah, yeah, and so that was I was really in a lot of danger. For some reason, he asked me like why, and I said, "Oh, you're ruining my shirt. I uh don't want you ruining my clothes." And he took it and he stopped. I think because I said it in a really calm way. Um and it was really unexpected too. I don't know. He really he said okay and he stopped. Like he actually like took my suggestion.
I
um
feel like he was taken aback. Like he's used to people playing into this role play of his, and either squirming or doing something that plays into the narrative that there might be a jinn or there might not be. But you were just so out of that world that you just talked to him like a regular human, basically not as a Muslim, but as I don't know, a normal American, I suppose, if I could put it that way. Like that was an
yeah,
American response of you to be like, could you not? And he was just taken aback by that. But
yeah,
it's baffling. Like we're laughing about this, but this guy has a reputation for beating the people that he's exorcising, um,
yeah.
and he's operating in
My
the
step
U.S.
He's operating in
How
the
has he not
US
been
and
shot yet?
I have no idea. But then it's like these people are respected, you know.
Yeah, because I'll tell
They
you why he hasn't been shot yet. Because the parents are in on this.
Yes, exactly. And they're not met with any resistance. Um and again, this is again happening in America. Um and I would be glad to say that was my first exorcism experience, but it's not.
What?
um
Okay.
yeah, I after that, nothing's changed with me, right? I still wasn't playing along
Wait, you
with
mean your
Islam.
last? That wasn't your last? Is that what you're saying, or wasn't your first?
That wasn't my last exorcism. I had
Okay.
another one. It was actually, so I have to kind of explain. So my dad, he really was just very he was starting to become unhinged, let's just say. Because I was, I was defying him, and I wasn't playing along with being this proper Islamic uh, child anymore. I wasn't being the goal. I wasn't the golden child anymore. I wasn't playing up to his uh, BS, and he started to unravel. And it was really strange because I was dotted on a lot by my father growing up. He was very like I would say I was a golden child, if you will. Like my dad, he really let me like I had a close relationship with him, and I never really um talked back to my parents. I never um misbehaved. Um so it was like I was and I am the oldest in my family too. I'm the firstborn. Um and so I had a lot of expectations on my shoulder. Um And so like my dad, he really uh he it was like I was his little princess, if you will. Um but yeah, but then after like I started to defy him, suddenly um that little princess was being a big thorn to him. And so he started so like he would like pick up fights with me, you know. Like I stopped
Wait, you
saying
were
like whenever.
you were his little princess when he was trying to get you exercised the first time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Again, I
exactly.
mean, to you this is all your life. This is all normal, right? But to people, I have to pause and have them, let it sink in for a second. Um, that this is someone's normal life, and this is not some weird exception of a life for a Muslim woman. But I'm sorry that you went through that. That your dad, your description of how he was before he went unhinged. I mean, to a healthy person is already unhinged, but you're saying it got much worse. Like if that's how
It
he
got
treated his princess, I can only imagine how he, started treating you after that.
yeah. Yeah. And it got really like he would just, randomly just start picking fights with me. And he would like intentionally like bring up Islam, in the conversations. He'd be like, um, like you really need to um do better. You got to make sure you're praying every time. And I wouldn't respond to him, but then he would just get angrier and angrier and angrier. Um, and I don't know how I kept my cool under that, but then it was like that was kind of our dynamic either way, Despite him treating me well, I was always, my expectations were to be heard, like seen, right, but not be heard in the family. Like I could never put in what I wanted for my own life, if you will. It was always, this is what we want you to be, and this is what we expect you to be, and you have to follow that. And so my and all of this, the exorcism and everything, it happened um when I was 19, and I right now I'm 29. Um, so this was like 10 years ago. Um, but yeah, so after that first exorcism, my dad, um, I guess started talking to his friends about this, and my dad ends up finding this place where this other sheikh who's also known for exorcisms. It was at a masjid, but then they had these rooms where they would do these exorcisms. And I didn't know I was going there. He just told me, hey, I just want you to come with me. And, I kind of naively did. And I went to that masjid. And I remember I was brought into this room, and it was all women, various ages. I think the youngest was like, she was 16. And my dad was like, we're gonna do another exorcism on you. And I'm like, there was no way for me to escape at that point. I was already there, and so I just had to uh, take my chances. And I remember just sitting down in the room, and I was talking to the other women in that room, and they were explaining to me like, oh, why they're there. Um, and they're like, oh, like there's a few of them who said that they believe that there was jinn in them, and it was causing all sorts of different issues in their life, right? Things like from medical issues to mental health, or having them struggle with their faith. And I'm just like, this is horrible. Um, uh, yeah, and my my dad, he left, and then the sheikh comes in, right? And he explains what's going to happen. And so he has this oil, this ginger oil, and he goes around the room and he asks all the women, "Do you want to have ginger oil on you?" And some women said yes. And ginger oil burns your skin, um, and so it's painful. And I remember like this one lady, she had her eyes closed, and she's like, um, she couldn't open her eyes, and I'm like, "Are you okay?" I thought like she got it in her eye, and she's like, "Oh no, it's okay. It'll be good for me." And I'm like, "Are you serious? Like your eyes are burning. You can't even open your eyes." And she was just like, "It'll be okay." And and then he asked me, and I'm like, "No, I don't want this." And he's like, "Okay, fine." And then he ends up turning on. There's like a speaker in the room, and then he ends up turning on this cassette tape with like the Quran reciting in the background. Not Oh no, it was Quran at first, like him, just a cassette tape, and then he had us waiting for a little bit, and then after that, he pulled out a microphone, and he started just reciting the Quran, and then he had this bottle, this spray bottle in his hand, where he read the Quran over it and blessed it. It was a blessed water, and then he was just spraying everybody. And I'm talking everyone. Everyone left that room soaked. Just spraying around. And he was laughing. Like this psycho was laughing. And someone said this sounds like a really weird acid trip, and I swear to God, this really happened.
Like,
Um
laughing. Does he believe that what he's doing is actually real or not? Like, pick a lane.
I don't know.
Like, you laughing, girl? Like, this is happening and you're laughing? Like,
I'm
man,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, my instinct is to make jokes, but this is actually not a funny situation. I mean, maybe it depends on your experience of it, of course, but I'm sure at least one woman in there was horrified to be going through this.
Yeah. I was horrified. And and to top it at that too, suddenly the woman in the room started screaming. There was a few women who started screaming and crying, and there was this the youngest girl in that room. She just starts growling, and then he sees her, and then he starts like with his microphone, like starts like reciting the Quran over her, like really loudly, and then he's spraying over her, and then she's just screaming even more, and then she's just flailing around the floor. Yeah, like a dog. Like she was growling. She was legit growling. And I was stunned. And I think I was literally the only one who was sitting still. And this guy, he's it was pure chaos. And I was just like, I feel like I was in the Truman Show, like, uh, this is something's like, it must be like some kind of prank, that old MTV show Punked. I thought I was in there. Like, come on,
Like
like
your
pull
dad's
out
gonna
the
pop up
cameras
and be
and
like, "Yeah, the joke's on you now. Please join Islam" or something like that.
yeah, really. It just like I couldn't believe this was happening, and exactly that's televangelism, but Islam. Exactly, that's exactly what it was. Um, I really couldn't believe it. And then I knew I had to stay still because if I started flailing around and like asking like what the hell is going on, they're gonna think I have me too. And there was a moment where he came up to me and he started like spraying me in the face. And I was trying to cover my face because I didn't want water in my eyes. And he's like, to take off, stop covering your face. And then I didn't have any way of escaping from this, so I had to do what he told me to do. And so like I was just very stoic. I just like kept my cool and I closed my eyes, and he just like spraying me, and that spray bottle hurt. Um, like the nozzle on that thing was powerful. Um, so like it was just like huge spurts of water just like hitting my face, and I was just like standing still. And then he took like a little bit of time with me too, and he's like kept like spraying me, and then I wasn't moving. And then he's like, okay, and then he just moved to the other lady, and yeah, and so that was the exorcism that I experienced. Um, and then I remember after that session, suddenly everyone was calm, right? The moment he said, it's over, everyone went back to normal. And I remember I pulled the girl that was growling and I asked her, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm okay. And then I'm like, a part of me was wondering, like, oh, um, she must be, like maybe there is something there. Because, oh my God, like the way she was acting, it was like, it was hard to believe that was just all an act. And so I asked her, like, I'm like, how did you feel during that? And she's like, oh, like I could feel the jinn taking control of my body. And I and then after, like, after the sheikh like was reciting the Quran over me and spraying me, like I can feel peace coming over me. And I'm like, no, there's no way that is true. I'm like, you're 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 psychologically being manipulated, you know? And this, I can't say for sure if she had some kind of, like, if she was schizophrenic, but then schizophrenics, uh, it's not like you just uh can switch like that, it was like she was playing this role, um, because she couldn't um be herself. I guess maybe I don't know her life story, but just from my own personal experience, like she must be going through her own struggles um it, where it's either like I there must be some kind of supernatural reason for this, and she somehow convinced herself of it. Um yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense with this, but yeah, after that, my dad, and yeah, jinns aren't real. I that experience, I didn't feel coming out of it convinced, that jinns were real. I came out of there convinced that it's like people would go to so many lengths because they're afraid to confront their religion. Um, I
I mean, I can
and
imagine that if someone, not everyone is that well informed on Islam. Not everyone can point to some of what the Sheikh is doing and say, you know what, this is getting a bit too black magic-y for me and not Islamic enough. Like, even within the rules of Islam, one can point out that this is getting a little bit too voodoo. Like, that's not how Islam should be practiced. But those people, especially if you're talking about a 16-year-old, they don't know. They believe what people are telling them about their religion, including the people they trust, like their parents and their sheikh. So it's not out of the question that they believe, if they doubt anything about what's happening in that scenario, they're doubting Islam, they're doubting heaven and hell, and they're going to hell for it.
yeah, yeah. Um, and I really just I was just really convinced, like, I really need to separate myself from Islam. Um, and so after that exorcism, um, I somehow convinced my dad that, because it was in sessions, he wanted me to go back there for like 3 weeks, once a week, and I didn't go back there after that. I started, because I was going to college at that time, and so I still live with my parents, but like I would be out later. Um, like I would leave early in the morning, and then I wouldn't come back home until like way late at night. Um, and like I really just like made any and every excuse I can to not give any room for my dad to like have me go back there anymore. And so that happened, and then a couple months go by, and then our relationship kind of reaches a tipping point where my dad comes over to my room one night, and then he sits me down and he's like, "You either need to go back to Islam, or you're not going to be able to stay here anymore." Um, and yeah, I remember just looking at him, and I'm like, I'm gonna go. And my dad looked really shocked because he was expecting me to, say, no, 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 I'm gonna go back. Um, but I didn't. I said I'm gonna go, and then he's like, oh, um, okay then. And then I remember I went into my closet and I pulled out my suitcase and I started packing my things, and he's just standing beside me, and he's like, oh, um, where are you gonna go tonight? And then I said, um, since I worked a minimum wage job at the time, so I really didn't have a lot of financial means to just stay at a hotel or a motel, and I was going to college full time too, and so uh, I said, I'm gonna go to a homeless shelter, and he was just like, "You're going to a homeless shelter?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to a homeless shelter." And he's like, "Okay." And then I packed my bag, and then I pulled up, the nearest homeless shelter, and he dropped me off. And I remember he pulled down the window after I got out of the car, and then he's like, you're not gonna make it without us. And I just walked away. And I went in, and they let me stay. And I have to admit, like, it sounds worse than it really did being at that homeless shelter, because they were some of the really, like, some of the best people I ever met. Um, Everyone was like really friendly to me. Um, and I had it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be staying at a homeless shelter. Um, like, my roommates, we ended up forming a close bond, and we would uh, go out to eat and go shopping together. And just walking around the city. And so I had some kind of support. Um, but I would have to admit, I had to get a lock for my locker, because people got a little there was some stuff that was going on. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of safety, um, I didn't really feel unsafe, and eventually, like, I did end up finding a place of my own. But then my dad, he would um start calling me and asking me, like, oh, like, how are you doing, and making it like he would put it in the way, like, oh, like, uh like, making it kind of seem like he was gloating, like, oh, like, how are you doing, like, like, as if, like, I was suffering. um but I wasn't. I'm like, oh, I'm doing good. Yeah. And I would tell him about, like, oh, like, my roommate and I, we would go here and here and here. And then that kind of disarmed him. And, like, he's like, oh, okay. And then he would eventually, it went from him trying to control the situation, right? Control me. And and then it turned into him begging me to come back home. Um and I didn't for quite some time. And my dad, I just saw the comment, like, surprised that he wasn't violent. Yeah, my dad, he wasn't violent to me. Like, I don't know why. Like, he never really was violent towards me or my other sibling. Um, I I'm really grateful he wasn't. Um, but it was it was a challenge, in the sense, like, I realized that I was in a narcissistic um relationship with my father. And um and then a few years went by, and I started to uh like, I finished college, and then I'm looking at, like, starting my career, and a sudden death happened in my family. um I was still in contact with my family. Like, my dad, um he started to soften up his language towards me. um and, like, we would go out to eat. Like, he would take me out to go eat, and he would be like, and he would see me without my hijab. Like, I stopped wearing hijab after um being kicked out from the house. Um and so I would go out to these restaurants with him, and he would make comments like, "Oh, I think you'd be so much more beautiful with your hijab." and I wouldn't say anything. I'm like, oh, okay, and I'll just kind of brush it off. But like, there are still a lot of attempts there to like try to draw me back into Islam, but it was less so about the religion, but more so about the family. He would be like, oh, like we miss you. Like your room is empty, and things like that, and just a lot of guilt tripping. Um,
I remember when we talked a little bit before this call, and I remember that you mentioned something else also in what he used to talk to you about during those those times together. Didn't he also like tell you about how people are suffering in your family because you're not home?
yeah, yeah, he did. So he had like, could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
I remember when you were talking to me about it. I remember you. I don't remember you mentioning that people missed you, but he was talking about how bad things are because you left, or how
Yes,
you're making people sad, basically, rather than people
yes,
miss you. We want you back.
yes. Yeah, he definitely made me feel guilty about that. And there was a death in my family that happened where we had lost I had lost a cousin in a really in a motorcycle accident, and it just really shocked everyone in my family. And my cousin, my dad also raised him too, and so and he was significantly older than me, but he was more like a brother to me. And I remember my dad, after my cousin's funeral, um he goes up to me and then he says, "What am I going to do if you die? um I can't properly I can't have a proper funeral for you. um I can't visit you." And I remember feeling so incredibly sad because I can see in his eyes. um I think for the first time, like, I can see just how sad he was. um and that really hurt. And I remember thinking, like, why is that an issue? Why does that matter? you know
Can you elaborate for people who don't understand? So he at that funeral he went to you and he said, if you died before he did, he can't throw you a proper Islamic funeral, and he should not visit your grave. And he's sad about that.
yeah, 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 he
I mean,
said
I'm
that.
I'm not repeating this to vilify him. He genuinely believes in his reality he's not allowed to do these things. So even if this wasn't meant as some kind of guilt trip, this is a human being who genuinely believes that he cannot visit his daughter because she's a kafira, and he didn't make the rules, Allah did. So he's now suffering because of those rules. At least that's how, that's the most charitable interpretation I can think of that scenario.
Yeah, yes. And yeah, that's, you put it really well. um yes. And he was really very conflicted. um but again, I I wasn't following. Like I didn't want to go back to the religion. Um, and I I was always very conscious um, prior to like I was always very conscious about me coming out as an apostate, what that would do to the family, you know, because I know understand what it's like to be in that mindset, and I didn't want to put my parents in a position where they're having to choose between their own child and Allah. Um, but then
But you're
that's
not putting them in that position. Remember that.
yes, I'm not. No, but that's how they feel, right? Um, that's
And that's
the
how you
belief
feel
that
because that's how they feel.
yes. And I and it's really hard to kind of deal with that guilt because it's like at one side you don't believe in the religion, but somehow you're made to feel responsible for another person's supposed uh, salvation, right? Like, um, I it was, and I'm not the only one that goes through this. You know, like I listened to your previous live streams, and it's just so many people struggle with this. Um, Feeling like they feel responsible for their family um, for suffering, finding out that they're no longer a practicing Muslim, right? Um, they're no longer it's like in the religion Islam, and yeah, and that's that's the common a very common experience. Um, I it was so interesting because back then I when I was 19 um there wasn't a lot of support online for ex-Muslims. Um I remember like Ex-Muslims of America was just starting um but then it was still kind of a very and it still is a very new thing, but yeah, and I didn't really have a like some like an outlet to really talk to other Muslim ex-Muslims about this. Um, I
How would things have been? And I'm not asking you this to have you regret anything that you did. It sounds like you always did what you thought was best for you and everyone around you. But how would things have gone differently if you did have that support at the time?
That's a really good question because I feel like the culture has shifted a lot within the last decade. Um, I feel like the social climate of that time, um, it was just a lot harder to come out as ex-Muslim, and it still is very much so. But uh, how I don't know. Um, I would go to like Islamic forums, um, and I would like ask questions there, um, just to like clarify any like really core questions that I had about the faith. And if I did that, say if I went to my local mosque and I asked those very same questions, I would be at risk of like, the sheikh judging me and saying things like, I think maybe, um, just being criticized and just full of judgment and making you feel guilty and scared, um, for having those questions. Um, and and possibly even like I was scared that if I uh, went to the sheikh and talked about this, they would tell my dad. Yeah, they would go out and expose me to my parents. Um, and at that time too, there were a lot of kids who would be uh, shipped off to Islamic countries, Muslim countries, to be re-educated. Um, that happened to a close friend of mine who I spoke about earlier. Um, and that was a very,
Wait, re-educated is putting it mildly. So the friend of yours who left and came back at the age of 12 in just a couple of months saying that she hates infidels, um, that's the kind of re-education that you're talking about.
yes, yes.
So, like
Um,
in blunt terms, you're talking about the problem of Muslims sending their not even just children, but we're talking women up to in their 20s even, sending them to their country of origin or country of their family's origin to be indoctrinated or fixed back into a good Muslim and then brought back or not brought back at all.
yes. Um, like it was very common. Like there was a lot of cases where I remember hearing about, oh, so and so, their parents shipped them off to this country, um, and sometimes they would say why, like, oh, like so and so was acting up, and so they had to be shipped off, or it'd be like, oh, their parents, they decided to just take them. Um, but yeah, and I was in a way also threatened with that too. Um, this has been like I'm a full blown adult at this time. I was like 24 um, when my dad suggested this. So he, him, my dad, and my dad and my uncle and my stepmother, we all they brought me into the living room when I went to visit them one day, and they're like, we want to talk to you. And I said, okay, what? Like, what do you want to talk about? And they're like, oh, we want you to come with your uncle and I to our home country. And I said, why? And he said, oh, it's because we want you to go visit your relatives. We want you to go see your uncles and cousins and your aunts. Really get you immersed in the culture. And oh, also, we want you to see this sheikh. And I uh I said no. I don't think it's a good idea for me to be leaving at this time. Like I have a job. I can't just be gone for a month. Um, and I was very skeptical. Um, I just know that's not really their intention. Um, they never really told me why. And they said, oh, don't worry, we're gonna bring you back, you're gonna be coming back. But I always just got
If you
this
have
sense
to
like,
say
oh,
it, I mean, if you have to say it, don't worry, we're not going to kidnap you. That's scary.
yeah. They're like, oh, you're gonna be coming back. Don't you worry.
Non-Muslims
Um,
don't understand the concept of a family vacation turning into a prison. Like that's not an uncommon story.
no, and I tried explaining this to my therapist, and she's like, oh, like what's the problem? You're making strides to reconnect with your family, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like this is a threat against my life, like my sense of well-being. Because there's so many horror stories of people who've been forced to go back, and they're actually um, in this one particular country that I know that people it happening to. Um, they they would be essentially they'd be like they're kidnapped, right? Their parents would bring them over to that country, and then they'll take their visas, and then so they have no way of escaping, right? They'll take their credit cards, any sorts of income or any way for them to escape, and they're in this foreign country, and then they're forced to go into like this outskirts um area and live there, uh and then be re-educated, um where there'd be like these imams and sheikhs, like, you know um, abusing them, uh, physically abusing
I've
them.
heard horror stories. Like one, you're not the first caller to tell me this or someone to write in and tell me this. I've unfortunately even heard of cases where people were sending me messages pleading to me to do something, and I seriously cannot. Like my hands are tied in those scenarios. We sometimes try to reach out to, um, like it's especially hard. Say for example, you weren't an American national. Like if you lived in America but you weren't actually an American, like you had a green card or something else, then there's absolutely zero that the American embassy will do for you in that other country. And even if you are American, it's not as straightforward as, send a SWAT team of guys to go pick her up. It doesn't work that way. This is a recurring horror stories. And so please, everybody, if you have Muslim friends, especially women, check in on them if they're going on a vacation and they're not coming back. Like this is not a one-off story, unfortunately. Um, it's heartbreaking, and I'm so glad that you didn't go, and I'm glad that you're telling people about this.
Yes, I and I've had heard other cases of that happening here in the U.S. as well. Um, I remember listening to this ex-Muslim story on YouTube. I wonder if their video is still up, but he was talking about how um after he came out as ex-Muslim, his family, they essentially they kidnapped him and held him against his will at in a basement, um, and he was abused and forced to try to say the shahada, um, but he didn't. And he was very fortunate that he came out of that experience alive. Um, but somehow he was able to leave. Um, and yeah, there's just so many cases of that. And it's so saddening that our stories aren't being heard, because we are putting our lives at risk. Um, and it's just really, it feels so disingenuous, um, from like hearing like progressive liberals, defending Islam, you know, but then they're completely sideswiping and ignoring all of what happens to ex-Muslims, you know, um, and we just there's no any like spotlight, and I feel like we're becoming um this silent, um I'm hoping, majority. We're growing in numbers, I feel, but at the same time, we're still very afraid to do this
Well,
because
I
we
want
know the
to remind
consequences.
you of this. I want to remind you of something, just to look at the glass half full of this situation. I mean, thankfully, you didn't end up stuck in that situation, and you're here to tell the story. And there's at least one person today. I mean, maybe not necessarily watching the live stream right now, maybe watching it offline in a few weeks, a few months, and a few years. There's at least one person that you have helped by sharing your story, and maybe even cautioned them from going and getting stuck in such a situation if they can help it. Aside from everything else that, every other way that they could be helped by hearing your story, we are making a difference. This is extremely important. And without you coming out to talk about it, without all of the other callers and viewers and all the supporters, like this would not be happening. So people don't realize that this is not all, fun and games. I mean, mostly it's not. We just try to lighten the mood every now and then, but it must feel, and I hope it feels amazing to you to know that because of you, you saved at least one person today.
Thank you. I because it wouldn't be possible without your support. Because you really help put our voices out there, and it really helps more, um, than I could ever really imagine. Um, I I guess I was always very afraid to come out. Like I've lost all my friends. I never told them I came out as ex-Muslim, um, because I know exactly how they would react. Um, it really is, you're doing us a really big service, and I really find it very commendable, um and I hope in a way it also brings you comfort to, um knowing that there is such a huge support out there for you, um to continue to do this for us as well. Um and I really thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I'll be honest with you, I never feel like I'm doing enough. And maybe I will feel that way when, like, all I care about in terms of following and viewership is reach, is that people hear these stories, is that people get this awareness. It's not that Aladdin is popular, or Aladdin's channel is popular, or my actual name's channel is popular. It's just that this work is effective on a larger scale, and I feel restless till that happens, till I feel like we're on the same platform or the same level of popularity or volume of our voices as the people who are responsible for putting us in this position. And we're far way away from that. But I appreciate everyone's support and encouragement. I'm trying to see the change, the scale of this change, but to me it seems very minuscule at the moment. But I like to remind people that it's not, and maybe remind myself as well. Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to do this without everyone's support, including you and everyone's vulnerability on these live streams as well. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Oh, thank you. Um, I I wanted to also talk about radicalization in
Hmm.
like Muslim Muslims in the West. Um, they're I find it so funny to me that you know, in the media, it's always like it's this is radical Islam, right? These are extremist groups, and they are. However, their ideology and their way of thinking is the standard in Islam. It's just that they've put it into action. Um, there was there was cases um, in my community where there would be like a sheikh going um, having to leave the country because he was being investigated for terrorism, right? That he was radicalizing the youth at that mosque. Um, and it actually happened to a group of kids who became radicalized, and it was a huge scandal. And what was so sad about this was one of the kids, they had talked about um, the radicalization, and they were speaking out against it. They're still Muslim, but somehow in their minds, like they've somehow rationalized, if you will, uh, this notion that, oh, this is radical Islam. However, because they were speaking out against it, um, a lot of the community had started sending them death threats, and they would uh, threaten his parents, ostracize them, saying that their son or their child is, you know, putting a bad name to Islam, and I it was like um as if they wanted him to take some kind of pride in his quote unquote radicalization, you know? Like why is he making this a big deal sort of thing. And it's so hard for non-Muslims to understand this, because they are meeting Muslims every day, right? They're their coworkers. Some of them, even their family members, they marry into a Muslim family. Uh, they are friends with them, uh, and etc. But and so they see their humanity, right? But at the same time, it's like they're becoming they're trying to put a blind eye to exactly what Islam is. Um, I remember reading this news article, um, and it was talking about how Muslims in America were becoming more conservative. Like even though they always were conservative, but they were there's an increase of Muslims who are voting Republican. And in those news articles, like it would be then they would interview these Muslims who did vote Republican, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's because the Democratic Party doesn't go in line with our values." And yet, uh, someone said Muslim for Trump. Yeah, I've seen a couple of those. Um, and and yet they don't highlight what those quote unquote highlights are. Um, and it's so hard to because at one point, they want to say there's a difference between moderate Muslims and then fundamentalists and radical Muslims, but if we look at it from a plain and from an objective way, those quote unquote radicals, fundamentalists are exactly what Muslims should be. Um, and the case that
Do you
happened.
consider your dad? Let me ask you this: do you consider your dad to be a moderate or a fundamentalist or something else?
Oh, fundamentalists for sure. I would definitely consider him to be a fundamentalist, and
What
it's so
about all
funny.
the parents? Like, remember one of the first stories that you told us? Do you consider all the parents of the kids involved in that situation to be moderates or fundamentalists?
I would still consider them to be fundamentalist because they still did not they didn't call the police like you said. you know
So, I
they
mean,
left the
so you went to
situation.
a Quran school full of fundamentalist Muslims in the US.
Yeah, yes, yes. um and I know maybe my story isn't um not all Muslims grow up, kids who grew up in America with Muslim parents that might not like my I think my story is a little more strange, but in terms of like uh just how we were taught, the teachings themselves were um very much in line with the teachings of Islam, and we were expected to abide by those standards. Um
I
and
mean,
so
we use fundamentalist like it's a dirty word, but what is a fundamentalist?
oh oh yeah. So a fundamentalist would be, say, someone who uh, would be, anti LGBTQ, right? That's
I mean, you just
pretty
described
much.
most Muslims. I don't think.
But there's a growing movement of Muslims who say that they are pro LGBTQ, right? Um,
I mean, that's a
it's,
minority, like a tiny, tiny minority. Um, I mean, you say that your story may be a special case, but everyone in the comments has been relating to every part of your story. And like I, for example, didn't grow up in a fundamentalist family, but I also relate to a lot of your story and your description, for example, of a fundamentalist would be anti-LGBT. Then everybody I've ever known in my life who is a Muslim was a fundamentalist by that definition. Um, it's hard to define what a fundamentalist is. Like, is it someone who adheres to Islam to the letter? Is that what makes a fundamentalist?
Um, well, that's really interesting, isn't it? I I don't know. Um, I I think because we do live in the Western world, right? Our views would be an outlier, right? We would be um we're not uh necessarily um how do I explain it? It's like it,
I mean, I think we're using the word fundamentalist very differently. I mean, on one hand, the colloquial way that we use it is fundamentalist is someone who stands out from the crowd and is a bit too weird about their beliefs. Is that how
yeah,
you think of a fundamentalist?
not necessarily. No. I view fundamentalism as people who are very involved in their beliefs. Just looking at the term fundamentalist, right? Fundamental, like they are basing they're they are following the foundations of said belief, right? They're following the
So
fundamentals of
they're
that belief.
strictly adhering to the belief.
Yes. Um, that's how I would view fundamentalists. Um, strict,
It's
yeah,
such a spectrum though, because I mean, for example, most Muslims think that being gay is a choice and it's something that one deserves to go to hell for and all that kind of stuff. Um, but the same person might also be someone who occasionally drinks and then repents or whatever. Um, so that alone, like people can be very selective in what they adhere to. So someone can be not a fundamentalist Muslim, but still follows certain aspects to the letter strictly. So it's such a spectrum that I worry that the word fundamentalist kind of washes away every story and experience as, well, that's just the exception. That's only with fundamentalists. But as most of us have experienced, the average Muslim and the average ex Muslim goes through these. So either Muslims follow in a more fundamental way and more strictly in general, or there are just more fundamentalists in Muslim communities.
yes. I would agree with you on that. And you're right. I mean, I guess just using fundamentalist as a blanket term really does take away the nuance to a lot of Muslims' experiences. And it is true, like, but I think also we have to also put into account how the person themselves view themselves as well. They like like, we all know, like you said, there be people who do drink and go out and party and sin, quote unquote, under the Islamic law, but like they would still consider themselves to be Muslim, right? And then they would still take on those like um, Muslim stances, like being anti-LGBTQ, um, you know, being anti-abortion, being all of that, like having those viewpoints. Um, I, it was really interesting. Um, I I don't know, cause I maybe it's easier in my mind to kind of separate the two because I feel like
Separate
there
what?
is like quote unquote fundamentalists, right? Um, which what I mean by that, like those who take on more conservative views and take on conservative actions, right? But then there would be quote unquote secular Muslims, and it's all a fallacy in my opinion. But I think there is a clear distinction um, in our society. Like maybe I'm not making sense, but uh, like for example, with women, there are women who wear the hijab, but then there'd be other women who don't. Um, and from the outside, non-Muslim point of view, you would see those two women and say, oh, maybe the one with the Muslim with the hijab is more conservative, right? And the other one, she's more secular. But I I don't know. And they're both considered Muslim, but then in Islam, there's obviously that one right right way. That the woman with the hijab, she would be that image of what it means to be a true Muslim, right? So I don't know.
Mhm.
Um
Well,
um
there's one thing I want to ask you about, but if you're comfortable talking about it. If you're not, we can just skip over that part. Um, but you had mentioned to me that you eventually moved back in to your parents' home. Do you feel obligated to stay with them?
no, I don't feel obligated to. Um so my stepmother, she just had um she was pregnant and she just had her babies. She has multiples, and I felt very like I wanted to help her out at the house because my dad's working, and she just needs a lot of support. And so I decided to just come back to stay until they're a little more grown up. And right now they are at that stage where I am like looking for other housing. Um, but I don't feel like I have to stay because I already left in the past. Um, now it's more of my parents, kind of reassuring them that I'm not gonna just leave and then not communicate with them. There's this sense of fear on their part that I'm just gonna be gone from their life.
Well,
Um,
have they reassured you about anything?
n- Not really, for being honest. Um,
I say
the
this
only
because I'm worried that you're putting too much responsibility on yourself to be the bigger person and reassure them and make them feel safe when, they certainly did not make you feel safe.
Yeah, um, and that's something I have been thinking about. Um, but I also have I have really young siblings. Um, and so I do feel like I have some kind of responsibility in the sense that like my dad, like my parents, they've become more and more um, uh, hardline. They want to have my little sister. I have another sister who is 4 years old, and whenever they take her out for shopping or when she goes out to play in the playground, she has on a hijab. Um, I like I it's like my parents, because I came out the way I have, like the programming didn't stick with me, they're like, oh, it's like we need to do better. They did the takeaway that they got from me is that we didn't try hard enough, right? And so now they're they're being a little more um stricter with my younger siblings. And so I I guess a part of me, I I, I want to help them out. Um I am uh like at this point, because they're so young, um I am like another parental figure for them. And it's like I want to show them that there is a different way, you know, there is a different option for you, and be that example for them. Um, yeah.
That's such a
So
difficult position to be in. I understand that. Yeah, I mean, if you want to gain your independence or not live with them, you're concerned that you won't have a close connection with your siblings and you won't keep an eye on the youngest sibling. Do you also feel like the way that they're treating her is your fault?
I don't blame myself for it. For
Hmm.
the longest time, like I have other siblings that live overseas, and when was when I was 19, when I left the family, like just throughout those years, you know, I would hear my dad mentioning them, right? And then they'll be like always mentioning like how good they are at uh at their Islamic schools overseas, and how well that they are um reading the Quran and memorizing and all this stuff. And I unfortunately I felt so bad for them, because like I really had no way of being there of a support for them. But with my siblings here that live in the States, I am there, and therefore it's like I have to, like I felt very guilty, and I know that it's not my fault, but at the same time, it's like if I don't involve myself in the family, um, then I do get afraid that they will get lost in all of this dysfunction. Um, and I do want to be a support for them.
It's good that you're aware that it's not your fault or your sole responsibility, but you want to do it to help them out.
Yes. Yes. Um, I I do want to help them out. Um, like whenever I would go out, when it's just me and them, um, my little sister, like I would have her get dressed, and then she would be like, "Oh, where's my hijab?" And she's 4, and I would just say, "Oh, you don't need it today." Um, and then we would go out. And funnily enough, my parents don't say anything. Um, and they see us walking outside, um, without her having her hijab on, and I, I sometimes I wonder, there's definitely this power struggle between us. Um, Whereas they'll allow me to kind of be in my siblings' life, and they want me to be a part of their life too. But it's like they don't want me to. um, like they don't want to say anything because I'm against I'm against their beliefs, right? But yeah, I don't know.
Well,
It
I
really it
think.
feels like a power. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You finish that thought. You were saying it feels like.
Um, I I yeah, it feels like a power struggle. Um, yeah.
Well, I'm sorry that you're in this position, and I admire your strength. I admire that you're able to go back to the same place where a lot of these bad things happened. And I don't want to get this thought in your head that you shouldn't be going back to that place. I mean, it's incredibly strong of you to not only persist, not only survive, but revisit that place and make it a safer space for your siblings. And that is admirable, that is courageous. And I am sorry that you are put in that position. I know it feels like a responsibility that you didn't ask for, and you certainly would not be at fault if you don't take it upon yourself to help them out, but you are doing it, and I'm sure that they are having a better life because of you, even though you don't have as much say in their life as your parents. Um, it's good that you're at least present in their space. You would have wished for that kind of person to be in your house, and now you are that kind of person in your house.
Yeah. Yes. Um, I I would say I am very grateful in a lot of ways because things could have gone south so many times. Um, I I feel like I'm very fortunate in that like I do have my freedom, like I don't feel tied down. Um, Being where I'm at, and not a lot of ex-Muslims have that privilege, and so I do want to send my solidarity out to them. Um, I definitely I empathize. Um, I really wish that there could be um more support out there, and you definitely do. You're definitely making that stride, and you're definitely giving us that support. Um, and I think the more and more, you know, as your YouTube channel grows, um, because the way I discovered you was through Genetically Modified Skeptic. I was subscribed to them, and then suddenly a notification came up on my YouTube channel of your interview with them, and I was really like surprised, and I was like, oh wow, there's an ex-Muslim who is speaking out, and I just went through your YouTube channel. I was like, oh wow, like this is really good content because you definitely are showing that side where you're giving us a voice and you're doing it in such a um, graceful way, and and logically, and just in a way that anyone who does come to attack your channel or attack ex-Muslims, you come up with such thoughtful responses, and you're not feeding into that um uh anger, like in uh just what 2 minutes hate, if you will, like with have you read George Orwell's 1984? um
Hmm.
yeah, when I read that book, like it felt a lot like my experience as a Muslim, and and a lot of times it's like these like Muslims feel it's like they need some kind of uh enemy, right? There's always this enemy, and you are not feeding into that. You're not giving them that opportunity to, even though they probably still, attack and, are aggressive, but you're not feeding into that state of mind, and um, it really is uh, such a huge um, I find that to be really um, a good thing. So yeah.
I I really appreciate you saying that, and I'm glad a lot of people have said recently that they found my channel through that video with Genetically Modified Skeptic. I'm really happy about that because that's just the more ex-Muslims I can reach and the more people I can reach in general, the more I feel like what I'm doing here is reaching an audience, and it clearly is. I mean, I wouldn't have met you otherwise, and I'm glad that we found each other.
And I am glad to, and thank you for letting me share my story. I This is the first time I've ever really spoken publicly like this, and so um, I really hope that this does help someone, um, and I really thank you for giving me that space.
Of course. And if there's one thing that you're leaving today's conversation with, what is that thing?
Oh, I would say one thing I would say is really take care of yourself. Um, and really, I think a lot of the times, um, coming out of Islam, and you're met with so much opposition from your family and friends and your community. Um, Sometimes we can get lost in that mayhem. And I would say really try to take as much care for yourself, um, emotionally, physically, mentally, and if possible, to spiritually. And I don't mean that in the sense like you need to like find another faith to follow. And that's something actually like I think would be not the most helpful route to go, honestly, especially if you're fresh out of the religion. Um, I but do what feels right for you is what I'm trying to say. And really try to get to know who you are as an individual, because for most of our lives we're told and taught to be a certain way, right? We're never really encouraged to be ourselves. And it might be a struggle at the beginning, but letting yourself get to know you, get to know what makes you happy, what makes you um, feel like you have some sense of joy in your life. That's something that you should really try to prioritize. And also keep in mind to not um, another thing too, I would say let yourself feel. You're gonna go through a lot of emotions, like I went through feeling very, very angry. Um, and I unfortunately bottled all that anger up in me, and it did me more of a disservice. And because I wasn't letting myself ex- express myself as, oh, I'm angry because of my experiences, Um, and it's just like really let yourself feel, because we've spent a lot of time um not allowing ourselves to be honest with who we are. And I think maybe that's maybe what distinguishes us um from other from other Muslims, I guess, maybe because we've took that step to be honest, um and really took that leap, that risk to challenge our beliefs and challenge ourselves. But yeah, really try to like not let yourself feel guilty for being angry. Don't let yourself feel bad for being sad, or just really letting all those emotions come to the surface and really processing it is what I'm trying to say, kind of processing our emotions. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, that's good
uh,
advice. Yeah, thanks for sharing that as well. And I hope that you continue to have a good life and to take care of yourself. And I hope that you have more and more people in your life who take care of you, so that you're not the sole, care provider in your family. I know that's a very taxing and difficult position to be in, but I appreciate that you're doing it for someone else just like you would have wanted someone to do it for you. It's very inspirational and brave, and thank you for doing it. And again, thank you for coming here today and sharing your story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. Well, thanks again to the caller for joining today. Next week, like I said, next week, if all goes well, I will be. Let me confirm that before I give you a commitment on that, because I'm very bad at scheduling. But next week, I might not be taking new callers. Am I? You know what? I'll get back to you on that. Next week, I think I'm taking new callers. So tune in on Tuesday. That's when I post about these live streams. Just look at the upcoming live streams on Tuesday. It'll be on Wednesday. And if there is a live stream taking callers, then 15 minutes before the live stream begins, you can click the link in the live chat to join as one of the callers. So thank you all for watching today. I really appreciate you being here. And before I go, I wanted to give a thanks to all the YouTube members and patrons and donors and everyone who's helped me do what I do. I want to reiterate how important it is to me that I have this platform and that we collectively use it this way. And that's all possible because of you. There have been so many incredibly generous people who have gotten me to where I am today. And without your continued support, I wouldn't be able to do this. So again, I appreciate all your help. And as always, think critically.